Welcome everyone to Tales from the 90s, your retro time machine back to my favorite time period, the 90s. If you watched last week, we were back in August of 1998. We're jumping ahead almost a full year. We're going to June of 1999. See where we're at with my own personal life and the timeline, and that'll actually continue to next week's episode, as you'll find out at the end. But anyway, let's get back in the time machine. We're going to episode number 83, June 1999.
Viewer warning. The following program contains material that may be too intense for some viewers. Parental discretion is advised.
Where every tale begins. Tales from the crypt, marathons, wrestling wars and morning yawns. Play kickball in the street, man, those days can't be beat. Tales from the 90s never die.
Yeah, if you've never seen these before, I pick a random month and year out of the 90s to talk about. Well, last week happened, actually the week before was like November 99, I think. Last week happened to be August of 98. Now we're going to June of 99. And next week's just happened to be September of 1999. So it's kind of like a timeline. I'll get into that when I get talking about my personal life in a little bit. But anyway, I pretty much gave you the format of the show. I just look back at the 90s through different forms, like things I'm interested in, like professional wrestling, books, movies, music, all that type of stuff. Pretty much what we do on here. I do a bonus episode once a month where it can be just pretty much any topic and don't even have to be relegated just to the 90s. The one I just put out last week was about my favorite wrestling theme songs of all time. And then at the end I did some knockoff versions of those. Those are pretty funny to listen to. But the one for this month comes out, I forgot to put it on my thing here, but on my notes, but I believe it's July 19th, which I think is a Sunday. Yeah, I think it's next week Sunday. And it's just a top 20 list, my personal list of my top 20 favorite Sega Dreamcast games of all time. So, you know, Dreamcast had a very short shelf life. It came out in September of 99, which actually I'll be talking about next week. I think that's September next week. Let me check my notes. Yeah, I didn't even, like I said, I randomly pick them, and I pick them when I'm done doing the notes for that week's episode. That's when I pick the next one. So it's not like I have some grand plan, but that actually does coincide pretty well because, you know, Sega Dreamcast came out, and it's famously 9/9/99, September 9th, 1999. So I'll just be looking at my favorite Dreamcast games of all time. Like I said, a short shelf life for that system. 99, I think they discontinued it by 2001, sadly. Yeah, it just couldn't compete with, you know, the Xbox and the PlayStation 2 that come out, you know, right after they came out. You know, and they were already competing with the PlayStation. So, you know, they were pretty much doomed from the start. And, you know, there's a whole thing about Sega. I'll get into that more in that episode. But yeah, that'll be Sunday next week, my top 20 Sega Dreamcast games. And if you watch these fairly regularly, you'll notice that it's my first time actually doing an episode back-to-back weeks for about a month now. It's always been something that's come up. Well, assuming this actually gets on there. You never know. I'm trying to adjust my microphone here. But yeah, we're going to talk about some news that happened around this time. Some pretty big news. June 19th, Stephen King, you know, if everybody knows me, he's my favorite author of all time. He was out for a jog or a run or something and was hit by somebody, caused pretty significant injuries. But I remember this being big news at the time because there was, I think the first thing I seen is, well, Stephen King barely hanging on to life or something. Yeah, and it was serious. It wasn't like it was nothing, but I think whatever the thing I seen it on originally probably either blew it out of proportion or that's what they were told. But yeah, he was hit by I can't remember if they were a drunk driver or just they weren't paying attention or something, but caused significant injuries and really caused a big change in his life. And obviously, you know, if you're a big Stephen King fan, then you know all about The Dark Tower. I guess even some that are big Stephen King fans, some are only like the big stuff, like, you know, It, obviously, you know, Pennywise the Clown. That's probably one of his biggest things. But, you know, his main focus around pretty much all his stuff has been the Dark Tower. It was a book that was started in the 70s as like a futuristic, but not really futuristic. I guess futuristic's not the word to describe it, but it's about like the Old West, but in like a different, almost like a different universe type thing. And if you read the Dark Tower, you'll understand a lot better than I can explain any of this. But anyway, you know, it was called the Gunslinger, and you know, he was going after the Dark Tower, and you know, the Man in Black, you know, which has been in many of his stories in different personas. But he would write, you know, he would go on and write more books for this periodically, but you know, over long periods of time. Well, anyway, when this accident happened, I believe he'd come out with, let's see, I think up to book 4, I think. So, you know, after this, he really sat down, because he had it in his mind, like, you know, obviously he knew he's mortal, but I mean, you know, something like that happens, it's like, you know, I got this story I want to finish telling, I need to get it done. So he wrote, I believe, the last 3 books over, you know, rapid piece of time, and I think the last one was released around 2004, I think. And of course, they came out with another one later on. It kind of fits between books 4 and 5, kind of like a part of a story, not like, you know, if you don't read it, you know, you're not missing the whole story. But anyway, you know, the Dark Tower series is, you know, pretty much the end of it came because of that. Because if not, who knows? We might still be waiting on the conclusion of that. We're still waiting on a decent attempt at a movie or a series of it, but I don't know if that'll ever come. That thing that came out in the movies, I think it was 2020, 2019, whenever that came out, that was an abomination. But anyway, yeah, Stephen King, so many great books. Probably my favorite was Pet Sematary, but he's got some really super long ones like It. And those seem to be some of his best too. You'd think, oh, the longer it is, the more boring. But no, he actually gets to, like, you know, flesh out these characters and these worlds more. The Stand is a big example of that. Great story there. And Under the Dome's probably one that's not as talked about. It's one of his more recent, not super recent. It was like, you know, early to mid 2000s, so it wasn't like super recent, but that was a really good one. I could go on and on about just Stephen King books. Obviously, you know, he created Creepshow, which was an homage to Tales from the Crypt, one of my favorite things of all time. So yeah, Stephen King, just, if you think what could have happened, you know, if he would have died, then not only the stories that we wouldn't have gotten because of that, but, you know, the Dark Tower series would have never finished, and just like maybe some of the great movies and stuff that came out since then. I know everybody knows the more recent It seems like, than the 90s miniseries. You know, who knows for sure if that could have came out or not. You never know. But it's weird to go back and think about things like that. Like, you know, a random thing like that happened. What if he'd have been an inch over further? He might have been dead. Then again, if he had been an inch over the other way, maybe he might not have got hit at all. And you never know. It's you know, it's just one of the things you get you thinking, like, you know, what if? But yeah, it's definitely some shocking news at the time, and, you know, obviously he's made a full recovery, and he's, you know, what, look at the time, like the time's going to tell me the year. It's, you know, 27 years later. Oh no, I didn't even mean that to be intentional, but 27 years is the amount of time between Pennywise sightings. So if Pennywise is the one that ran him off the road, then, or maybe it's just we're talking about the Dark Tower series and all these different characters that could be other characters or could have other meanings in other worlds. What if somebody that was, you know, on the side of Pennywise went to run him over, and now they're coming back? I'm joking. But if you've read the Dark Tower series, you know, like especially those last few books, he actually puts himself as a character in it and references this car accident. I called it car accident. He got hit. He actually references it, and you know, the need to get the book done, and the main character Roland. It's weird because he, like, finds out that he's a character in a book, you know, and it doesn't, like, because, like, what if you found out you were a character in a book? You know, would you just like, well, I'm a character in a book, nothing matters anymore? Or would you be like, yeah, I'm a character in a book, but I'm still living this life. It's not like I found out and I'm erased from existence. You still have to live the life. So, yeah, Stephen King actually puts himself as a character in the book and references this car accident. You just have to read the series. It's not your typical Stephen King thing if you've never read the Dark Tower stuff. There's all kinds of stuff. Like I said, there's elements of Western in it. But don't get hung up on that. That first book will get a lot of people to where they don't want to continue reading because, oh, it's a Western, and it plays out a lot like a Western, even though there's a bunch of stuff in it that makes it clear that supernatural stuff is involved. But yeah, don't get hung up on that and stuff because, you're going to meet characters in the next book that come through that join his, what's called his quartet, which is, his basically like his group of friends that are helping him reach the Dark Tower. And there's going to be, different worlds and, there's like a insane like train that has riddles and is trying to kill the main characters. At one point they come onto this almost like the Emerald City from the Wizard of Oz. There's a place where I won't give a spoiler, but a character comes back from a book from the 70s. If one of his first books, Salem's Lot, a main character from that one comes to help out, and there's these werewolves and mutants and just it's pretty much all the stuff, but it's not like the typical Stephen King monster back from the dead, pet buried at the pet cemetery coming back, that type of horror. It's the horror is pretty much in just the whole everything that these people experience, and there is actual monster type things too, but it's pretty much if you took all Stephen King's books outside of the Dark Tower, put them in this chat GPT thing, and make this weird story and add elements of this, you still couldn't come up with what he came up with. But who knows whether we'll see any actual who knows, he may just come out just all of a sudden with another book. If you ever read this is becoming the Stephen King podcast. If you ever read his book that he co-wrote with author Peter Straub, it's called The Talisman. Really good book, by the way. It has a lot of elements of the Dark Tower series, crossing over to what they call the Territories, which is just like another almost different dimension or something of their world, where they're different people in this world, and each person has what's called a twinner, which is basically what I guess you'd consider a doppelganger or something. But it has a lot of elements of that, and he came out with a sequel to that, or they came out with a sequel to that called Black House, which was really good. Well, they're just coming out with one called I believe it comes out in October, called There Are Other Worlds Than These or something like that. It's a phrase that's said a lot in the book, and I'm not exactly sure if that's the exact title or part of that title. But anyway, that's coming out, and I'm excited about that. But anyway, back to the podcast where we're just talking about the 90s and not just Stephen King. I do want to talk about what I was talking about at the beginning, about my timeline. I'll give like a brief version of, I was born in 1983. No, but I've talked about it many times on here. We lived in Norwood, Ohio, which is a suburb of Cincinnati, and I lived with my mom and the evil stepdad, Marky Foe, who is just, he always hated us kids. He always said, his famous line is, "I beat you because I love you," and I'll just leave it at that. But yeah, definitely abusive and everything. And, the last episode was, like I said, was June of 1998. I was, not June, or July, or August of 1998. And I just finished summer school, so I didn't fail the 7th grade for a second time, I should say, because I already failed it once. So that's where we were there. We're living with Marky Foe, which I call my stepdad. I don't remember why. His name was Mark. I don't remember where he got the name Marky Foe. We just started calling him that. But, things were just getting progressively worse and worse. We were never allowed out. The only time we went outside is when we snuck out. I talked about that in the, because it was August. It was summer, so he was at work and Mom was at work, so that was about the only time we could go out, was when we snuck out and nobody knew we were outside. But skip ahead to this time in the timeline, which I believe I talked about before in different ones. But toward the end of this year, or not this year, of 98, finally left him after he freaking came at me with a screwdriver. My mom finally, got the strength to leave. And a lot of that had to do with the fact that she was actually found another person, which I don't feel like she did anything wrong there. She was trying to find a way out of the situation because, he made the most money. She didn't make enough money to support us in the house we were living at. In fact, when we moved out, we had to move in with our granny, and then we went and stayed at a hotel over the weekends, to give Granny a release, what word am I trying to look for? Not relief, a reprieve, a rest, I guess, from having to deal with us, because it was my mom, my stepdad Steve, which she didn't really know at all, so she didn't really trust, because after Marky Foe, she was not very happy with my mom's choice of men, and I can't blame her on that one. But it was them two, me, and my 3 brothers, Josh, Travis, and Clint. So there was a lot of people to have in a house there where she was, she'd been living by herself. And I say that it was the very end of '98 or the very beginning of '99. I think it was the beginning of '99 that I think about it. So it technically was this year we're talking about. I was trying to get things right on the timeline there. If I'm boring you with my own personal life and you're like, who cares? Sorry. It's part of my story, so I'm going to tell it. But anyway, yeah, my mom ended up meeting the guy, our new stepdad, Steve, who she ended up having 2 girls with, my 2 younger sisters, later on. But it was, we'd moved out, like I said, from there. It was a crazy scene, too. Like, he was literally, like, come down the stairs naked for some reason, chasing you with a screwdriver, okay? I don't even remember what the circumstances was, but I was, believe I was either 14 or just turned 15 at the time, so there's no reason to chase anybody with a screwdriver if you're 40-something fat old bald guy, especially if you're naked. Like I said, I don't remember what it was. Probably had something to do with his clothes, because we were always having to, I always got the lovely task of having to go down and do laundry literally all night, because it took our washer and dryer so freaking long, and he's literally peed himself all the freaking time. So if you imagine all the clothes he went through, yeah, big bad man peed himself. But anyway, shouldn't speak ill of the dead. But yeah, that was a crazy scene, because not only that, my mom finally is like, okay, I'm out of here, and got us, and we went outside, and he came out running. By then he'd put on underwear at least, but still, imagine this almost 7 foot tall fat bald guy running out in underwear. I don't even remember if he still had the screwdriver or not, but he literally jumped on the hood of the car, and my mom took off, and he just laid there on the sidewalk. Like, we went down the road, and you could still see like a couple blocks away, and he was still laying there. Like, don't ask me. But anyway, like I said, we ended up moving with Granny. And I started my dumb stuff. We had to go to a new school to finish out the 8th grade. And I didn't know anybody at this school. I was getting lost because the middle school and the high school were together. And, I would get lost. And I just, I don't understand what came over me during a lot of this time, to where I just, I was lashing out, I was acting out. You would think that I would be in a better place because, out of that situation. Well, I guess to my teenage hormones and everything, it's like, you can't process the fact that, all that bad stuff is over right now. You're still whatever's going on in your head, and whatever had been causing me to not do my schoolwork and fail 7th grade and barely doing anything in 8th grade. And I say all that not to try to make an excuse like, oh, I couldn't control it. The only reason I say that is because I don't understand why I acted the way I did. And as I get more into the story, I'll talk more about that, I guess. But yeah, ended up skipping school a lot, and I found out that the woods were behind the school actually, led about a mile and a half, whatever it was, directly into the backyard. Basically, it was a big giant, yard that kind of went around the corner. We called it the Bottoms. I don't know why it was called that. It was called that forever, the Bottoms. So, the woods connected to that. So, when I first discovered that, I walked home from school, but then I was like, and I started skipping school and just going out into the woods and sitting. I would get some of my stepdad's baseball cards and sit out there, not the intention of stealing them. I always put them back. It's just something to do, to read the back of the baseball cards. I have my my Walkman, or my Discman, that had a radio on it, and I would just sit out there and listen to music and read wrestling magazines and just sit out there because I didn't want to deal with school, like, for the stupid reason of I couldn't find the class. That was all it took. At first I was just going to the bathroom and sitting for a couple hours, and then I was like, well, and then I started doing earlier and earlier. It's like, well, I can't stay in here all day. They're going to notice something. So I just, was able to, back then, I doubt today I could have just snuck out the doors that easily. They probably got, for one, they definitely got cameras, but they got, police officers and stuff around that would, but I was just taking off through the woods and sitting there all day. Well, eventually, I should have seen this coming, but eventually they figured out I was skipping school, and, I got warned about it. And I made up some dumb excuse, like literally I called the principal's office and like, why haven't you been to school? I was like, and literally the only thing that popped into my head was, oh, well, I had to go to these meetings with my truancy officer for my other school. Like, for one, you're saying that you're a truant, which is, means a fancy way of saying you skipped school there. So why would you even say, and it wasn't even true. I didn't have a truancy officer. Well, there was a truancy officer at the other school, but I never dealt with him because I never skipped school. Other than the I'm sick where I stay home days, which, didn't amount to much. Nowadays, if a kid misses 4 days of school, they call CPS, but that's another point. But, yeah, that was literally the only thing that popped into my head. Don't ask me. But anyway, I don't think they bought it at all, obviously, but, I kept skipping school, and they would try to call school at night, and I would, like, unplug I know that they're going to call, so I would unplug the phone. Don't ask me why they didn't try to call during school. So I'd unplug the phone. My granny found out about that one time and was mad at me. Like, one of the only few times I've seen her actually mad at me. It was terrifying, like, because this woman hardly ever got mad, at least, to the grandkids. And it instantly hit me, oh no, I just made her upset. I felt like the biggest piece of crap in the world. But as you can guess, it eventually led to actual truancy officer getting involved, and I had to go to court over it, and ended up getting sentenced to community service. And this was, after, we'd moved back to Norwood, actually, with Mom and our new stepdad, Steve. A little different part of Norwood. It was still relatively close to where we lived. We could have walked there. We did a few times. I'll probably get into that next week. The couple times we made a trip back to the house to mess things up in there. I'll save that for then because it's getting too long. I'm sorry. But yeah, ended up getting community service, and it was actually this month. And I've talked about before reconnecting with my dad because of the whole Marky Fo stepdad stuff. Ended up my dad not being allowed to see me, and he moved to Indiana, so even if he could have seen me, he wasn't around much to be able to do it because he was living in a different state, where I live now pretty much, even though I don't know, was it about 45 minutes from where he lived, even farther away, but that's beside the point. But yeah, by this time I got reconnected with him. Fortunately I did, but due to unfortunate circumstances, because his brother, my Uncle Dan, died in May of '99, and so this is literally the next month after we had gotten reconnected, and I started going over there. And at the time he was still living in Indiana, but he was staying there with my grandpa Wally to help after Uncle Dan died, because my grandpa Wally was living in a small apartment, and Uncle Dan was living in even a smaller, like, attic apartment at the top. But he was just staying there to help get all his things in order and help Grandpa Wally out. But community service time comes around, and I had to go to this very bad part of Cincinnati, over the Rhine. If anybody knows that area, it is scary to go through. I'm just leave it at that. But it was I believe the community service was somewhere there. If it wasn't there, it was a neighborhood close to there or something. But I'd never been there before. I was told what bus to get on and about where it's at. And I ended up going right past it, unbeknownst to me. and ended up getting to the end of the line, and the bus driver was like, well, we'd already passed that, so blah, blah, blah. I go, so we go back, and instead of the bus driver not go back, I had to get on another bus to go back, but instead of, asking the bus driver, like, will you let me know when we're close to here? I just tried to keep a lookout for it. I didn't even know what side of the street it was on. I could have been looking the wrong side of the street. I was probably looking for a big sign that said, I don't know if it was a probation place or community. I don't think it's a community service. I think it said probation or something, whatever it was. It's been a long time. But yeah, completely missed it. So I was like, great, what am I going to do now? I'm going to go home, I'm going to get yelled at, because, I was getting yelled at all the time, but it was all my fault. Like I said, I was still acting out, being mean, disrespectful, talking back. And I don't understand why. I hate the fact that I did it. And I don't know if I understood why, if I just all of a sudden it comes to me why, it wouldn't make it any better. It doesn't change it. It is what it is. But, like I said, didn't want to go home because I figured there'd be, I'd getting yelled at. So ended up going up to Price Hill where my grandpa Wally was, and, spent the day there with him. And, ended up going home, and boy, I was in all kinds of trouble that night. They said that the probation officer called, and because I technically wasn't on, I don't know if I was technically on probation or just that's who handles the community service, because that's all I got, that and a fine I had to pay. Luckily, I didn't end up having to go into juvie or anything. I couldn't have survived that. I'll tell you right now, I'd probably been there crying or something, crapping myself. But yeah. They called where were you at, and I explained to them what had happened, and luckily they were actually nice enough to let me well, just come in, you can do not an extra day, but your first day will be tomorrow instead of what you missed today, and you won't I won't report to the court or anything as long as you show up. And I was able to finally, I asked the bus driver the next day and finally got there. But community service is definitely an experience, not one of those happy times. We had to, with all the different things, we were literally out on the highway cleaning up garbage like you see in movies that prisoners do. We didn't have orange jumpsuits or anything on, but that's what we felt like, and I guess that was the point. And there was one day we had to go into this school that I guess was one of the Cincinnati public schools was shutting down for good, and the power had already been turned off to this place because I guess they're too cheap to keep it on. And we had to go in up to the 5th floor even, and carrying down these tables and chairs and equipment and stuff. And like I said, the power had been off, so not only you get the light in the school from the sun, but you don't get any relief from the heat. Like I said, being June of 1999, well, any year, I guess the year don't matter, but June, it's hot, so we were sweating to death. And then the final day comes, we're going to the Cincinnati Zoo, and I end up having to shovel elephant poop. Didn't even get to enjoy looking at the animals. I think I've seen the elephants, but I mean, whew, that poop is heavy and stinky. It seems like obviously, yeah, poop stinks, but I mean, elephant poop is a different type of stink. But anyway, yeah, that's pretty much how I was spending my June of 1999, doing the community service and acting like an idiot and back-talking and other stuff. And I'll get into that more for next week, because next week, at the end of the month of September of 1999, I ended up having to, basically getting thrown out, but not exactly, I wasn't thrown out, but I was told I had to go live with my dad in Indiana because, I couldn't listen to my parents. And I'll get into more of that next week. But yeah, that's where I was in June of 1999. Shoveling elephant poop, carrying heavy desks, and who knows how many degree weather it was, plus inside with no air conditioning, and, cleaning up the side of the road, and just, exactly where I deserved to be. But we'll move on now and talk about some things that other people might know about, if you know about it. Professional wrestling, like I said, one of my biggest things that I've loved forever, that I'm involved in nowadays. But back then I was just a fan, still just a fan, but take a look at some of the stuff going on in the wrestling world at the time. It was really the hottest period of wrestling. But it was a point in time when the WWF was taking over, and the WCW, which had been, you know, really big since mid-96 when the NWO formed, and, you know, had that run where they had, you know, their show outdrew WWF's show for 83 weeks in a row on Monday nights. But it was during this time that WCW had really started to go downhill, and people could really see, like we thought this company might be a competition or even overtake WWF. Now we don't even know if they're going to last, and of course they didn't even last another 2 years after this. But this time they put on their pay-per-view on June 13th. It was called WCW Great American Bash. It's from Baltimore, Maryland. The 9th Great American Bash pay-per-view, and the first one to use the horrible WCW logo. Look up 99 2000 WCW logo if you don't know what I'm talking about. And also look up like 96 WCW logo. Like, you can't even tell what this logo says. It's just like crap. But anyway, on this show, Ric Flair with Arn Anderson defeated Roddy Piper by DQ to regain the WCW presidency thing, which is, you know, become the president of WCW, which seems like Ric Flair and Roddy Piper were fighting over that for years, it seems. But the Jersey Triad, which was, of course, DDP, Canyon, and Bam Bam Bigelow, but in this form it was DDP and Canyon, they defeated WCW World Tag Team Champions Chris Benoit and Perry Saturn to win the titles. And at this time, I wasn't really watching much wrestling at the time, because we had moved, I believe I touched on this a little bit last time I talked about 99. We had moved back to Norwood, didn't have cable at this time, and didn't really have a way to watch even the syndicated stuff, really. So really my only keeping up with wrestling was every once in a while getting to see a show or in a wrestling magazine. But even then it was like, you know, by the time you get the magazine comes out, the thing that they're talking about in the magazine already happened 3 months ago. So I wasn't watching much during this time. You know, from about a little bit early 99, I'd say WrestleMania, after WrestleMania 15, and a little bit after that, to WrestleMania 17, like the night after that, basically, is when I started being able to watch full time again. So it was almost 2 full years, and this was definitely in that time period. The main event of the show, WCW World Heavyweight Champion Kevin Nash retained his title, defeating Randy Savage by disqualification. Then on June 26th, ECW had their Hostile City Showdown from the ECW Arena. This wasn't a pay-per-view. It was actually their 6th and final Hostile City Showdown, because, of course, they went out of business in 2001, too. But, you know, this was one of their house shows from the ECW Arena, where it wasn't a pay-per-view, and they took some of the matches and they would put them over the course of 2 different, what they called ECW Hardcore TV, which is their TV show, which is like syndicated. This was, I think, before they got their TNN deal, I think. The main event was the Impact Players, which, of course, Justin Credible and Lance Storm, with Don Marie, defeated Jerry Lynn and his mystery partner, which turned out to be Sabu, in the main event in an unsanctioned match. Don't ask me why they bother having an unsanctioned match in a company where there's pretty much no rules. Anyway, the other big event that month happened the next night. It was June 27th. Is the WWF's King of the Ring tournament, which if you've never seen that before, like they literally, in today's time period, just had their King of the Ring tournament. Of course, King of the Ring and Queen of the Ring tournament nowadays. But it's basically a tournament to decide who's the King of the Ring. And back then it was just, you win a crown and you're called King of the Ring. There was no real stakes for it, like title shot. I keep getting, mustache keep annoying me for some reason. Sorry. Anyway, this was from Greensboro, North Carolina. It was the 7th King of the Ring pay-per-view, but the 13th King of the Ring tournament overall, because it used to be a tournament by itself without a pay-per-view. Sometimes they would have it as like a special attraction, you know, where they're coming to your town, not even televised. Like, we're going to have a one-night-only King of the Ring tournament, just as a way to sell tickets. Like, oh, this is something different. But on this night, Billy Gunn defeated X-Pac to win the King of the Ring tournament. And, you know, I think a lot of people said Billy Gunn was like the worst King of the Ring in history. But the main event saw Vince and Shane McMahon defeat Stone Cold in a handicap ladder match to win complete control of the WWF, because at that time Stone Cold had like become CEO and was like running things and like ruining Vince and Shane's life even more. So he ended up, they ended up having a winner takes all ladder match, and of course, none of the corporation was allowed around the ring, but the briefcase kept getting raised up during the match, and all kinds of stuff went on. Of course, Vince and Shane are going to take back over. Stone Cold's not retiring at this point. He's not going to take over. It would have been cool if they'd have done this storyline a couple years later, once Stone Cold actually had to retire. Is a reason he could still keep feuding with Vince. But by then, all that momentum had pretty much been gone from that storyline. But some other title changes that happened this month. June 14th, Ivory defeated WWF Women's Champion Deborah on Raw to win the title. June 21st on Raw, Mideon finds the WWF European title in the trash because Shane McMahon had been champion, and of course he didn't want it anymore because all he wanted to do with that title was take it off of X-Pac. And once he did that, he's like, well, I don't care about this anymore. So he put it in the trash. Don't ask me how. I don't know if this was the same town he put it in the trash and it was like, obviously months later. Or they carry the same garbage can around with the same trash in it from town to town. But somehow Mideon found this title in the garbage and asked Shane, can I have your belt? And he's like, yeah. And he thought he meant like a belt to wear his pants. But no, he pulls out the European title and then just, I'm champion. Sort of the way that happened with the WCW TV title later on, with Hacksaw Jim Duggan found it in the trash. You can tell how much they really value these titles during this time. And also, June 28th, Stone Cold, which is the night after King of the Ring, after he'd lost control, he'd written in himself in the contract that he gets a title shot no matter what. So, as a way they can, because obviously, if Vince and Shane win control of the company back from Stone Cold, they're not going to be like, oh, you can have a title shot. They're going to say no more title shots ever. So they had to find their way out of that so Stone Cold could get the title back. But yeah, the next night on Raw, he defeats Undertaker for the title. But yeah, that's wrestling at the time. Like I said, wasn't really watching much of that. Still haven't completely caught up on that time period. Like watching all the shows. I mean, pretty much a wrestling historian. I've gone back and read all about and learned all about the history, but never actually watched some of these shows. Maybe I should. But talking about some TV right now, about some shows that were ending at this time. One show that I definitely grew up watching as a kid a lot was Unsolved Mysteries. It lasted 11 seasons, and 9 of those seasons were on NBC, and then they moved to CBS. It's been brought back a few times with different hosts on the Lifetime channel, Spike TV. I think it's even had some episodes on Netflix, but nothing will beat the original that was hosted by Robert Stack. That you always hear that whenever you hear his chilling voice talking. It's like, you almost got the sick feeling like, oh no, I could be next. Somebody's gonna kidnap me. I'm gonna be on Unsolved Mysteries. Don't ask me why. It's just that with the intro always creeped me out as a kid. And it was always seemed to be on right after Rescue 911. Whether that's just me remembering it that way or if it really did air in that way, I'm not sure. If anybody remembers, let me know. But even the song to the Rescue 911 was sort of ominous. But I remember watching those. Of course, Rescue 911. They do reenactments of going out and rescuing people, obviously. And then Unsolved Mysteries comes on, and the scary thing about those is they're all unsolved. It's like, there's all these people that are going missing, and a lot of them are presumed dead, and you do get some updates where some people are found or some mysteries are solved, but for the ones that aren't, it makes you think. It's like, geez, all this stuff's going on, and we got all these cops and they couldn't figure it out. It's like, it's really creepy. But yeah, that show was ending at this time. Like I said, grew up watching that all the time as a kid. Another show that was ending was The Nanny. It ended after 6 seasons and 146 episodes on CBS, and it was one of Marky Foe's favorite shows or something, so we were always watching it. I enjoyed it too. It was, one of my wife's favorite shows too. Fran Drescher played that role perfectly. That annoying, exaggerated voice, and just the whole thing with the Max Sheffield, the playwright from England. He's all proper. He's got the butler. The butler and his assistant Cece ended up hating each other so much they ended up getting married, I think. It was funny. And, oh, geez, the Fran's mom, and especially the old grandma. She was the funniest one on that show. But yeah, it ended at this time. And then one final show that ended was one that already ended to me, was Doug. It had a total of 7 seasons and 117 episodes. But after 4 seasons on Nickelodeon, and it ended in like 93. But then 3 years later in 96, Disney bought the rights to it and brought it back to be part of their Disney One Saturday Morning on ABC, because by that time they'd bought ABC, so they took over their Saturday morning cartoons. And I've talked about it before, just Doug was not the same on Disney as it was Nickelodeon. I mean, they had the same artists and stuff, and I can't remember, I think they might have had the same voices, or for some of them at least, but it felt different. Like, I don't know if the writing was different, it just all felt different, not just the fact that it wasn't on Nickelodeon. It just, I don't know, just, I never really enjoyed it on Disney, so it ended for good at this time. Also forgot they also had a movie right after the series ended, or right before, I can't remember. I think it came out before, and it was in theaters, but I never actually even seen it, because like I said, it was Disney, so I didn't want to see it. But we'll move on now, talk about music. Music, obviously, one of my big things. And it was during this time that I just started listening to different, well, I guess technically the year before, towards the middle of that, started listening to other musics other than country, because country music's my all-time favorite. But we'll take a look at the Billboard Hot 100 charts. Number one song for 1 week plus 4 weeks back in May, giving it a 5-week total, was the song that seemed to be everywhere at this time, "Livin' La Vida Loca" by Ricky Martin. It was a one-hit wonder, but that song was everywhere. Like, you couldn't escape it. The video all the time on MTV. You would hear it everywhere. You go to stores. One of those songs that gets in your ear, and like, you always know all the words to it. Even if you don't like sit down and like, I'm gonna purposely put this song on. I don't think I've ever done that. But yet, I bet if it came on now, I would know every word to it. But the other number one for this month was, I believe, the very first song by Jennifer Lopez, who had just been an actress up until this point. But the song was "If You Had My Love." It was number one for 3 weeks, plus 2 weeks in July, giving it 5 weeks total. Now we flip over to the American Country Countdown, which I was, still listening to all the time at this time. Big song by Tim McGraw was "Please Remember Me." It was number one for 2 weeks, plus 3 weeks back in May, giving it a 5-week total. The song was written by Rodney Crowell, which was, had a lot of big hits in the 80s, and was an even bigger songwriter in my opinion. But I mean, that was a powerful song. Tim McGraw did very well on the vocals on that. A great song. And then George Strait's "Write This Down," which, a big song for him toward the end of the 90s. It was number one for 2 weeks, plus 3 weeks in July, giving it 5 weeks total. This is funny. There's 4 songs in 2 different charts that all had 5-week runs each. Either part of before the month started and during the month, or during the month and after the month. So funny how that works out. But we'll look at some albums that were released at this time. There was 4 of them, I believe. Yeah, there's 4 albums that came out this time, and of these 4, I actually own 3 of them right now. The first one is the very first album by Brad Paisley, which everybody thinks of him as a not exactly newer artist, but from the early to mid 2000s to mid 2015 or something. I know he hasn't had many songs released recently. I think he is just coming out with an album now, but you wouldn't think of Brad Paisley as a 90s artist, but technically he is, because he released an album in the 90s. Like I said, his first album, called Who Needs Pictures, went platinum, went to number 13 on the Billboard charts. Really great debut. Really showed off his songwriting, his singing ability, and his guitar playing. A lot's written about his songwriting and guitar playing, and a lot of people gloss over his vocals, but his vocals are really good too. Like if he couldn't write or play guitar, he would still had success, I believe. But I mean, he could do all of it. So amazing debut album here. The title track came out first. Only went to number 12, surprisingly. You know, I thought that would have been a bigger song. It was a really good song. His next song became his very first number one. He didn't have to be a powerful song about singing about stepdads, and you know, it didn't hit me at this time. You know, about my stepdad Steve stepping up and taking on the responsibility of 4 kids that weren't his own. You know, I didn't feel that until much later on. Like I said, I don't know what was causing my behavior at the time, but I certainly wasn't, didn't hear this song and be like, oh yeah, I'm glad Steve stepped up for us. It was, it was more like, I don't know if I necessarily hated Steve or anything. It was just, he was, I guess just this new guy, and was trying to tell me what to do. It's like, you don't know me, but, it's, when I became a stepdad later on, I understood what he went through, and I guess it made me feel even more ashamed. But that was, like I said, his very first number one. The next song, Me Neither, wasn't that big of a hit, but it went to number 18. It was still a pretty fun song. Showed off his guitar a lot in that one. And then his final single from the album was the second number one, We Danced. It's a great story about a guy that works at a bar, and this woman left her purse there, and that's what basically what started their relationship. Sometimes that's how it happens. You always hear about these, oh, love at first sight, I saw him across the room, or we've known each other since school. Sometimes it's just simple as this woman forgot her purse and came in to get it, and stuff like that. Real stuff that I don't know if it was I don't think it was inspired by a real life story, but it could have been. And that's always the best kind of music, where, like I said, it don't have, like, a lot of the I'm not saying my music's great, but the songs that I write, not all of them come from personal experience. I couldn't, if I try to make everything personal experience, nobody would want to listen to it, because it's just, you want stuff that's relatable. So sometimes I'll just, get an idea from for a story and write it, and it's not a personal song. I just made up the story, but it still sounds like something that'll connect. Well, at least I try to. I'm not, like I said, I'm not, oh, I'm a great songwriter. I try to copy. I was just going to blatantly say, I try to copy some of the, not copy the songs, but like the style, well, they, try to make a twist here, and I don't like set out like, well, I'm going to make this song do this. It's just, a song, I've tried to do that, where I try to, like, I want the song to go here and here, and it almost never happens. It just, a song will start. I don't know if anybody out there listening to this is a songwriter or anything, but a song will sometimes start a certain way, and you think you know how it goes, and sometimes you'll get there, but a lot of times you'll go off in different ways and end up being a completely song, and at the end you're like, where did that come from? And what happened to the song I wanted to make? But anyway, on to the next album that came out. That's the only album on the list of albums that came out that I liked that I don't own, is Smash Mouth's Astro Lounge. It was their second album. Only went to number 6, but it was 3 times platinum. The very first single I've never even heard to this day is called Waste. I've never heard of that song. The next one is Can't Get Enough of You Baby. It was always on commercial. Oh, sorry, burp there. It's always in commercials, and it was a remake from the song, I believe, from the 60s. And then the next song, Then the Morning Comes, which was a moderate hit, and I remember hearing it on the radio a lot. But the final song that was released would become their signature song, the one that everybody knows from Shrek and everything, is All Star. That song's everywhere. I always play it at wrestling, either before the event starts or during intermission. This is one of those songs that always plays. Surprisingly, only went to number 4 for being as big as it was. You had thought that would have been a shoo-in at number 1, but only went to number 4. The next album I owned, I ended up getting while I was a teenager living in Indiana, like after I'd moved. And it was Vertical Horizon's album, Everything You Want. To my knowledge, the only big album they ever had. It was actually their 3rd studio album, but the first major label album, and the first one that got them recognized. Very first song was called We Are. I don't remember that being on the radio. I remember it being on commercials for the WB for randomly, just that pops in my head that the chorus played in one of those commercials for the WB teen shows that they had. I believe that was Dawson's Creek, unless that was a different network, unless that was yeah, I think that was the WB, those type of shows. But anyway, the title track, Everything You Want, went to number 1 and was pretty much their signature song. and it was went back and looked at the statistics. It was actually the most played song of the year 2000. The next song was "You're a God," really good song. It only went to number 23, and their final single is my favorite that they do, is "Best I Ever Had." Like I said, my favorite of theirs, and actually became an even bigger hit for country singer Gary Allan a few years later. But a really good song. And then an album track from that I really liked was a song called "Miracle." I forgot, talking about the Brad Paisley album, every song on that album is good. Like, it's one of those albums that I would do on my Tales from the Album series, which I need to get going on again, where I look at albums where not every song has to be like, I have to like every song, but close to that. But that would fit the bill because I liked every song on there. Probably my favorite song on the album wasn't a single. It's called "Holding On to You." It's just one of them classic things that you could imagine George Jones singing. Such a great song, and he sings it so well. But the final album on the list is Limp Bizkit's "Significant Other." It's their second album. It went 7 times platinum, and pretty much their album that made them like mainstream. That led off with the single "Nookie." Everybody knows that one. Like, that song was everywhere. And then Rearranged and In Together Now, which I'm not as familiar with. I think In Together Now had Method Man on it. But the final song on there is, I don't know if it's their signature song or just one of their signature songs, because obviously there's Nookie, there's Rollin' from the next album, and then there's this one, Break Stuff. That was the one, just the whole, and I was really, as a teenager, I didn't hear that during when it came out in June of '99. I probably heard that toward the end of '99, maybe early 2000. And that was like the attitude. It was just like, people are getting me mad, I'm just gonna break something. That was, that hit on the teenage attitudes that a lot of us that were at that age were feeling at the time. But yeah, that album really put Limp Bizkit on the map. Alright, now let's take a look at the Nickelodeon lineup that I chose for this week. We're going to be looking back at June 7th of 1999. This is a Monday. Like I said, this is during the summer, but after, I just talked about before how I'd spent, a lot of times during the summers, sometimes weeks at a time at Granny's house. Well, we had just moved back to Norwood during this time. And Granny needed a break from all of us, so I definitely wasn't going back over there at this time. So, having no cable, I definitely was not watching Nickelodeon then, but it's still kind of cool to look back and see what I missed. And of course, Nickelodeon, you start at Nick at Night. We got Bewitched, one of my wife's favorites. Dick Van Dyke Show, Taxi, Newhart, I Love Lucy. The Jeffersons, which I loved. Mary Tyler Moore Show, Dick Van Dyke Show again. Taxi. Then at 6 we start the Nickelodeon portion. You're on Nickelodeon, Charlie Brown, which is just Charlie Brown branded for Nickelodeon. Then we get The Busy World of Richard Scarry, one of my favorite cartoons. That whole, basically town full of animals and the worm in the little apple car. Just love that one so much. Franklin, never really watched that. Rocko's Modern Life. That cartoon was crazy. I love that one. You're on Nickelodeon, Charlie Brown again. Rugrats, original Nicktoon there. And then at 9 we start Nick Jr., because even though it's the summer, they still have Nick Jr. on during the weekdays. We start with Kipper, which I was never really much of a fan of. Then we got Blue's Clues, probably the most famous Nick Jr. show of all time. Little Bear, loved that cartoon. Franklin again. Gullah Gullah Island, very underrated, not talked enough about show these days. Was so good. And then we got Busy World Richard Scarry again. Another episode of Little Bear, Blue's Clues, Franklin, Kipper. And then at 2 we're back to Nickelodeon. They have the Nicktoons double play where they have 2 episodes back to back. We got Doug, because they were still showing the reruns on Nickelodeon, the ones that they own, not the Disney ones, obviously. Garfield and Friends, classic cartoon. I didn't realize they were still showing that in 99 at this time. Rocko's Modern Life again. Then at 5 we got Are You Afraid of the Dark? can't say enough about that show. My favorite Nickelodeon show of all time. I've a bonus episode on here. It's one of my very first ones I did. Not the first one, but one of them. It was my top 50 Nickelodeon shows or cartoons of all time, and Are You Afraid of the Dark was number 1. Figure It Out, the last good game show Nickelodeon ever had on there. Then we got All That, sketch comedy show. I just watched a bunch of those the other day from, that were more in recent times, and it's just trash. Can't compete with the older ones. Cat Dog, I was never really a fan of. Then we got Doug Again, Rugrats, and then looks like they've got a 2.5-hour marathon of Hey Arnold, which I was never really a big fan of Hey Arnold. I know a lot of people were, sorry. And then we get to Nick at Night, which started at 10:30 at this time. Used to be Nick at Night started at 8. Then it went to 10 on Saturdays, 9 on Fridays. And now it starts at 10 because, kids are staying up later and later. But anyway, they had a marathon of Leave It to Beaver to end the night. So definitely times were changing on Nickelodeon, but they still had a lot of good shows on that I would have watched. Not doing the Saturday morning cartoon lineup for this week because being in June, they were on reruns and stuff, so it's harder to get information on that, to find out exactly what was on during that time. Normally for those, I keep them during the TV season, which, if anybody knows, is from September to the end of May. Basically how school used to be. But anyway, just a few more things to get into here. We'll talk about some sports stuff that was going on. Baseball, the end of this month of June would have been, about the midway point of the season. And the leaders at the end of the month for the National League were the Braves, my team, the Reds, and the Giants. Like I said, my team, the Reds, we were half a game ahead of Houston at the time, which was, of course, in the National League then. The Houston Astros are now in the American League after they realigned everything. But we ended up finishing second in the division. We were a game and a half behind Houston, and we were tied with the New York Mets for the wild card. So they had to do what they don't do anymore, but they've only done a couple times, I believe, is have a 163rd game, because there's 162 games in the baseball season. They had to have a special one-day game where winner gets the wild card spot, loser is done. And of course the Mets beat us. I believe it was 1-0. They beat us, and we played at our stadium. I can't remember what the reason was, but nowadays they go on like head-to-head records and division records and stuff like that. So that way a team doesn't have to have another, one extra game in there where everyone else doesn't, because, it's not really fair to have to play another game and then start the playoffs right after that. But yeah, that's how that happened. And of course, I forgot the leaders of the American League at the time were the Yankees, Indians, and Rangers. And in that year's World Series, which of course happened in October, the Yankees beat the Braves. Those are the two biggest teams of the 90s anywhere there. And of course, end the year with the Braves and the Yankees, and the Yankees ended up winning. The players of the month were Jeremy Burnitz and Rafael Palmeiro, if I can speak. And the pitchers of the month were Al Leiter and Pedro Martinez. But yeah, that was the last time. Not the last time the Reds would be in the playoffs, but if you look at the time now, and like I said, the end of June was, the cutoff for, used to be like the very beginning of July would be the All-Star break, because that was about halfway. Nowadays, I think the All-Star game is next week, and recording this July 7th, so, the season starts a little bit different, but it's pretty much the halfway point anyway. But anyway, all that to say, the Reds are we're like 16, 17 games behind in last place in our division, and about 7 or 8 games out of the wild card spot. So we're doing nowhere near as good as we were doing back then. But we'll look at some NASCAR news. Bobby Labonte, who drove the number 18 Interstate Batteries Pontiac, I believe it was, he won 2 of the 4 races this month. He won the MBNA Platinum 400 at Dover and the Pocono 500. And the other winners for this month were Jeff Gordon. He won he drove the number 24 DuPont Chevrolet Monte Carlo. He won the Save Mart 350 at Sonoma That was a road course track. And Dale Jarrett, driving the number 88 Ford Quality Care car, won the Kmart 400 at Michigan International Speedway. And this was actually the year that Dale Jarrett won his first and only NASCAR championship. So one of those races, obviously, that won him that title. Movie that was released this month, I don't know when I seen it. It wasn't till probably the next year, was South Park, Bigger, Longer, Uncut. And I'm not like the biggest fan of that movie. Like, it's okay, but I don't know, I always found the show funnier. But at this time, I wasn't watching South Park. Like, I'd probably heard some of the references, like the You Killed Kenny and some of the other stuff at school, and just didn't get it. But it wasn't until around this time when the movie came out and we moved in with Steve, I think he got a tape from one of his friends or something with a bunch of the episodes on it, and we would watch it. Like, I'd never seen a cartoon like this. The stuff that they would say, and this is back in the days when they had it censored. Nowadays, you can get away with saying whatever you want on Comedy Central, but back then they censored all the words. But still, I couldn't believe some of the stuff that they were getting away with having on TV. And like I said, around this time was my first exposure to South Park, and like after that, man, I was a huge fan. Like, this show's still hilarious. But like I said, the movie itself, I don't know, I just didn't care for it as much, I guess. I think they tried to make too much of a big story, because of the fact they had to as a movie. I think they could have just done, I don't know, 3 episodes and put it in the theater. It would have been as popular, I think. But anyway, just, like I said, the movie came out at this time, but it was also my first actual exposure to it, to the series, which I believe started in 97, unless I'm wrong. So it'd been a couple years, but like I said, lack of cable and not being allowed to watch it. But yeah, that was, like I said, my first exposure to South Park, and it was like nothing I'd ever seen before. Talk about some kids' meal toys. Of course, we got to talk about the Happy Meal. This is one of their big things of the 90s for Happy Meal, was the Beanie Babies. They were everywhere. They came out with the I believe it was the 3rd series of the Beanie Babies came out through McDonald's. There was like 12 of them. And the big thing at this time was everybody was like collecting them, keep them in their bags, not just from the McDonald's, but everywhere you can find them, because they were supposed to be like this big thing where they're, just like even 10 years later, they're going to be worth thousands and thousands of dollars. And I think nowadays, even the most rarest ones only get you $20, $25 or something. Like, I think that because they purposely put such an emphasis on, this is going to be a collector's item, this is going to be huge, you're going to want to save this, it's going to be worth a lot of money one day. I think that it kind of created the opposite thing, to where it's like everybody's keeping these safe, everybody, such a big hype around it that ended up not being that, because people that were collecting them to sell them for the money already had them. So, and when the people that wanted to sell them for the money went to sell them, it's like, well, why do I want to buy that? I already have it. It's like, whereas other things in the past have been like, all these things like this, didn't know it was going to be this big, and it turned out, that's the things that end up actually being collector items, is the things you don't expect. Not when you it's almost like you put a marketing sign on it, like, collect this, big money later, a big flashing sign, and it's like, people bought into that too much and cared more about that than actual, what the toy was for. It's like they put it out just for that purpose. It's just a simple toy with, a simple stuffed animal toy that really doesn't do anything special, that they made such a big fuss about that ended up being almost nothing these days. I seen one on eBay, like one of the ones that said rare, and it was listed for $5. Buy it now, not even auction. Buy it now. That says all you need to know. But Wendy's came out with toys from the Cartoon Network series Johnny Bravo, which, talked about before, wasn't a big fan of the Cartoon Network. But these are toys from the series featuring a bowling game. One of those little handheld games where you you push buttons and get the ball going, or some of them had water in it. But, this was a bowling one, so I think it probably had like one of those things where you went like that, and, those type of little tiny toys that they came out with always in the 90s. Cheap to produce, but kids loved them. They had a watch, a wallet, and sunglasses. And then Taco Bell came out with, because the big, all the rage in their advertising was the Taco Bell dog, the Chihuahua. Kilo Taco Bell, that one was huge. And they came out with, like, they had a Taco Bell dog Pez dispenser, message maker, which was a little notepad, and then they had a stamp with it. I believe it had the Taco Bell dog on the stamp. A treasure keeper, which was like a small little clip-on carrying case you like clip to your like belt buckle or purse if you're a girl, I guess. And a fire escape maze game, which is, you know, just kind of like that bowling game. And also a Taco Bell dog little figure, which of course was probably the most popular one. It would have been the one that I wanted the most. Hardee's had pullback toys based on the Pinky, Elmira, and the Brain cartoon. This is when they tried to shoehorn the Elmira character into Pinky and the Brain, you know, from the Animaniacs. These were like, you know, those pullback toys where you got to have them on either a wooden or linoleum floor to get them to go across, because it would not go across the carpet. Arby's had endangered species toys, and these were like little animal action figures that were based on different endangered species. So sort of like a learning tool, but also, you know, something the kids can play with. And then finally, Subway had another Cartoon Network series here, Dexter's Laboratory toys. These were like action toys. They had like a squirt toy, a notebook, some kind of measuring tool. I don't know what it's for. Maybe it has something to do with the laboratory theme. And a launching type toy where you launch something. So a lot of Cartoon Network tie-ins there. Finally, I'm going to talk about books. I talked about Stephen King earlier. He didn't have any books that came out this month. He wouldn't have been able to promote them because of that accident. But there was a couple Goosebumps books that came out. First one is in the Give Yourself Goosebumps special series, which the Give Yourself Goosebumps is like the old Choose Your Own Adventure books. But the special editions were where they always had more things, like you'd have items you'd have to keep track of, a lot more branching stories. The book itself would be bigger. But this is number 6, Revenge of the Body Squeezers. And it's an interactive sequel to the 2-part Invasion of the Body Squeezers books that were in the Goosebumps 2000 series. And I've never read any of those, so, you know, I don't know the story behind the Body Squeezers. But the other book to come out this month was from that Goosebumps 2000 series. It was number 19, Return to Ghost Camp. And it's not a direct sequel to the original Ghost Camp, which was an original Goosebumps series book, which I haven't read. But it's the same type of setting, just different characters in a different, like, camp. You know, there's a lot of recycled themes throughout the Goosebumps series. You know, the sibling or the cousin, you know, the sibling that annoys you, or you go to stay at a relative's house and your cousin's annoying you. It's like, I swear R.L. Stine had issues with family members. That, or there'd be like a camp thing, you know, or a theme park. You know, a lot of the same themes, but then again, you know, when you're kids, you don't think about that. You know, he could have wrote the same book twice and put different characters' names and a different title on it, and I think kids would have read it and be like, oh, that was my favorite Goosebumps so far. You know, he could have done any of that, and us kids wouldn't have cared. But yeah, that's just a couple of the books that came out this month for Goosebumps. Like I said, next week we're going to be on episode 84. We're going only 3 months into the future from now, September of 1999. It'll be my 9th trip through 99. Like I said, 3 months after this episode. I was 15 at the time and just starting high school. And you'll see that I start high school in Norwood, and by the end of the month, I'm at a high school in a whole different state. And I'll get into more of that. I've kind of touched on that already, but I'll get into that more next week. Till then, thank you guys for joining me. It's always fun to get on here and just talk about, you know, my topics that I have, and just, you know, whatever pops into my head. And, you know, sometimes I'll stick to what I'm talking about. Sometimes I'll ramble off. I'm sorry about that, but, you know, sometimes those are the best kind of conversations to have. You know, you never know where it's going to go. Keeps it from being too boring. At least I hope it does. Hope I'm not boring you to death. I'll get out of here anyway. I'll see you next time.
And now, I predict the future. Next week, you'll be in the same time, same place, same station, for another hideous, hateful haul of horror.